I'm talking about Adrian Proszenko from the Sydney Morning Herald. Hello, AP.
Yes, hello, Jimmy. Jeez, it must be a slow news day if I'm making news.
Well, the article today from Dean Bulldog Ritchie talking about the Terrell May interview which set alarm bells ringing. I had an inkling, and I remember us talking about it, so I looked it up. Terrell May's complicated relationship with rugby league, published in the Sydney Morning Herald on the 12th of September 2024, under your byline, Adrian. What do you say? What do you say to this?
Well, apparently I've got blood on my hands, Jimmy. I'm the reason why the Roosters have speared him. So it's got nothing to do with their salary cap situation, or that they need injury cover for Sam Walker or Brandon Smith, or they've got 1,000 other forwards on their books. It's my doing.
Yes.
Look, I recall that interview really well. It was actually, just for a bit of background, I had a sit-down with him. It was organised about a month before it was published.
Right.
So it wasn't, I think there was a picture painted where it was like, how dare he come and say all these things on the eve of the finals. It wasn't. It was about a month before then. And we sat down, and I just thought he was a really intriguing character, and I wanted to know more about his story. And it was a really interesting one, and he talked about the fact that he does have a bit of an ambivalent relationship with rugby league for a whole number of reasons, and it's because I think he initially played it to please his father. His brothers obviously were very good at it, and he was a little bit in their shadow, even though he was like the middle brother. They were much better at football at an earlier age, to the point where he didn't even make his school team, which is quite extraordinary, given that just recently we learnt that he's the RLPA Impact Player of the Year, and Trent Robinson played him for 27 games, which is quite extraordinary. So there's a bit of background, and he's got other interests as well. He's worked in the disability sector. He talked about growing up in Mount Druitt, and in many respects, this was his escape to a better life for himself and his family. He grew up, often struggling for a feed, not having lunch to take to school. So he's got all of this talent, and for various reasons he's fallen in and out of love with the game. And I thought it was a really good insight at a time where I think the players and the media managers are really trying to control the message, and we don't get the players raw and unfiltered very often. And I'd hate for this to be a consequence where players actually clam up and are reluctant to trust media and to tell their story without fear of reprisal. So I think it's an oversimplification to say that it's simply because of this one interview the Roosters have decided, no, he's not the footballer that we thought. Because you've got to remember, the ink's only still drying on his contract. He signed a 2-year contract extension worth about $900,000 recently. And he was a good player when he signed, and he's probably a better player now. And people talk about his commitment to rugby league. I mean, he left his pregnant wife to go and represent Samoa just a couple of weeks ago. So all of this happened. The timing wasn't great because he was away and didn't have sort of family support, etc., when this bombshell got dropped on him. And he did actually take less money to stay at the Roosters than he could have got elsewhere. And all of a sudden now he's got to regroup and find himself a new club.
You took it to an area where I always wanted to explore as well, and you talked about raw and unfiltered, and now if you're a player, you're looking at that going, do I really want to talk openly? And from a journalistic point of view, you're now thinking, how am I going to get players to open up if this is the alleged outcome of what's transpired? And I think you're exactly right. There's all these other factors that come into play, but if you want to, he did an interview, we played a grab from it with Denon Kemp in Bloke in a Bar in March that talked about how he didn't want to train, and the similar things that you extended upon in your article. But then he signed the deal in April, so surely the Roosters were aware then about what his attitude was like towards rugby league.
They didn't need to pick up the paper and read this story to realise that he's a different cat. He's actually quite a quirky character as well. Even I remember we had our photographer, Louise Kennelly, and she wanted him to pose up for a whole lot of different shots. And one of them, she said, do you mind if we do one without the bum bag? And he sort of said, no, that's part of who I am. So just right. Stuff like that. But no, you're 100% right, Jimmy. It's really hard in this day and age for journalists to get quality time one-on-one with a footballing subject. And this sort of it doesn't help, to suggest that. And I thought it was props to Terrell May for sitting down with me and telling me his story, or in an unvarnished fashion as well. From the very beginning. So I hope that there are more opportunities to do that, because more and more clubs are now fighting with traditional media in terms of being content creators. We want to put out our stories that are edited and filtered, etc. The players themselves use Instagram and their own platforms to tell their story. So I think there's still storytelling to be done via traditional media.
Contrast that to what you sometimes get with the women's interviews, which I think now we're getting into dangerous territory here. It might be a gender thing, but I also think they're not as accustomed, conditioned like a lot of the male NRL players are about telling their story. They're much more open in interviews and telling their story. So again, it's just a difference that we find there. Clint Gutherson, done at the Dragons. 850, 800 is the speculation. Thoughts?
Yeah, about 2.5. That's a big investment in a guy that, let's talk frankly, Parramatta didn't think he had 3 years left in him. In fact, they were probably wondering whether they had a better option as soon as next season, and obviously they have signed Isaiah Iongi, and Clint Gutherson was prepared to accommodate that move and move out of the fullback spot where he has been by far, Parramatta's heartbeat and arguably, along with Mitch Moses, their best player for a long, long time now. So, again, it speaks a little bit to Shane Flanagan's mindset and how he puts his rosters together. So Shane is always looking for a bargain, and he's done that with Damien Cook, Valentine Holmes, possibly Josh Adokar. We're not sure if he'll end up there or potentially Parramatta. But even during his the nucleus of the side that he assembled at Cronulla, he'd often pick up players where other clubs would heavily subsidise. That's not the case with Gutherson. It's a clean break. Parramatta aren't chipping in, but he certainly finds value perhaps where the incumbent clubs don't see it. So he'll be good. And of course, with Ben Hunt leaving, they'll need a new captain. And I would suggest that it'll come down to a choice between Damien Cook and Clint Gutherson for that role.
Menai Dragon said, can you please ask Adrian what's happening with the Dragons in regards to replacement for Ben Hunt? So that's another part of this story too, because they've got the money to sign Gutherson because they don't have the $950 that they were spending on Ben Hunt. Yeah.
Well, there have been several names mentioned. I think I always thought that at Cronulla, it'd be hard for them to extend Trindle and Daniel Atkinson, and they've extended Trindle. So I wonder whether or not Atkinson can see an opportunity elsewhere. And then you've got Adam Dwayne, Lachlan Ilias, some of the usual suspects that have been struggling to sort of pick up a club or a long-term option for themselves. So they've got money to spend. There's not a great deal out there. I mean, we saw, for instance, one of the big Sydney clubs in South Sydney, the Rabbitohs went and picked up a halfback in Lewis Dodd who's not in the NRL. So you're looking at non-traditional pathways where they're getting an established player or someone who's coming up through the ranks through the Australian lower grades. So there ain't a lot out there.
We'll wait and see how that plays out. We're not exactly sure how much Lewis Dodd was played, but my understanding was he was barely top 5 halfbacks in the UK. So it's
well, he was playing reserve grade at one point. He got dropped from the first team. So it's a big call for him to come to an established club and a club that will have big expectations and pressure on it.
Just on Ben Hunt. Feels like Ben wants to go back to the Broncos. Feels like the Broncos are very open to Ben coming here. They may not be able to fit him in with the money that will be required. Feels like the Dolphins are very much open to that. Feels like the Roosters have got some short-term opportunities there for Ben Hunt. Maybe it's the Bulldogs. Where do you anticipate Ben Hunt? This is going to be a big story next week when he gets out of this Kangaroos camp.
100%. Well, Ben Hunt expressed the sentiments that you're alluding to, that there's a certain romance about him going back to Brisbane, and we know all about the grand final and a shot at redemption. Michael Maguire, I thought, made some very pointed comments in that he would like to see that happen, or was open to the opportunity of that transpiring. The Dolphins you mentioned have got some money. He probably solves two problems at the Roosters, given that Brandon Smith and Sam Walker are going to start the season on the sidelines, and he can play both half and hooker. I think he solves a lot of short-term problems for a lot of clubs. Potentially, he causes some if he's looking for a year of a deal of beyond a year. So all of a sudden, if Ezra Mam's, for instance, out of action initially, but then comes back into the side. Yes, he could potentially play hooker for Michael Maguire, but, at the Bulldogs, they've got a couple of, 2 or 3 promising young halfbacks, so he might be good for a year, but would you give him a second one? Would he be blocking someone else's progression to first grade? So these are important questions for Ben Hunt and for those clubs to answer.
No doubt about it. Hey, if Vanessa Knight, yes. If her first try scorer bet was correct, could she be a celebrity tipster somewhere, given the fact she backed 101 pop in the Melbourne Cup? Well, anyway, where are we at with this investigation? There
are very few people gloating about tipping Knight's Choice, and the Brimsons are one of them, so good luck to them. It's brought with the some unwanted headlines and attraction and scrutiny from the NRL Integrity Unit.
Yes.
An update, Jimmy, my understanding is that investigation is closed. Nothing to see here. There was a version of events that Brimson's agent gave, which the NRL are satisfied after they did their own due diligence, and part of that would have been liaising with Sportsbet, which is a partner of the NRL's. So ultimately, my understanding is that the account name, the account from which those bets were placed, was Vanessa Knight's rather than AJ Brimson's. So my understanding is that the Titans have been told that unless any new information arises, that case is closed. There's nothing to see here.
It felt that way too. But what about him trying to brag on the back of his mum's good tipping?
Well, that's the other thing. You talk about social media and how players portray themselves. I guess that's the great learning. Like, you don't want a big note, or I know that it was a joke, and it was, I think the way Jim Bannigan, his manager, described it, was a giggle gone bad, but it would have been very uncomfortable for him and his family for 24 hours. Brought them some unwanted attention, but no harm done. So anyway, I don't know what the lesson is, Jimmy. Just stick to the mainstream media if you've got a message that you want to get out there, Terrell May style.
Spoken like a true newspaper proprietor. Just on that, in your article yesterday with your colleague Michael Chammas, you did somehow link an innocent passing on of mother's Melbourne Cup success to Tim Simona, who was backing his opposite centre to be the first try scorer in games in the 2016 National Rugby League. I thought that was a little bit of a stretch, Adrian.
Well, I guess if we're talking about a betting drama involving a rugby league player, that's the last one. So it wasn't my intention to conflate issues there, Jimmy. But again, this is like it's an important thing. Like the integrity of the game is of paramount importance. And if rugby league players bet, whether it be on novelty bets in games that they don't play in, all of a sudden there's all sorts of dramas that can arise. And that's why the Integrity Unit spent some time to delve in and find out exactly what happened. And thankfully, there's nothing went awry here.
Lachlan Lamb is what Mark's suggesting. So what is Lockie Lamb? He's been over there with Lee for the last 3 seasons, had a lot of success over there under the coaching of his father. What age is Lockie Lamb? Because I'm thinking he'd be an obvious
26 years
marquee
old.
signing. 26, okay.
Yeah.
Marquee signing for P&G.
Yeah, possibly. And it would make a lot of sense. So that's the other one that we're really. I think it's an off-season story if nothing gets announced beforehand. Like, where we at with expansion? We know that the Perth stuff has stalled for the time being. PNG, it's all been very quiet on that front. There was a bit of rumours doing the rounds that potentially around the Pacific Championships, maybe a week or two ago, we might have had an announcement. But I think the NRL was very lucky with the Dolphins. They gave them a very short lead time, but they were dealing with a club that had been established for a long time. They had a lot of the building blocks in place. Obviously, having Wayne Bennett available to coach them was massive as well. So they're not going to have those luxuries this time around with the new franchise. And because of the all of the different new challenges that P&G presents, you want to give them as much time as possible to get ready if they're going to be successful straight away.
Just thinking about that further, how good was Wayne Bennett to make him the coaching candidate for all 3 proposal bids that came in last time around? Like, that is just strategy.
Well, that was the caveat. The NRL basically said to them, Wayne Bennett has to be your inaugural coach if you are to be considered for the license.
Yeah.
Which speaks to, and I've got to say that he did an amazing job with the team, all of the power brokers at the club to actually get that club up and running and competitive from day one.
It's a hell of a negotiation that Wayne walks into then, isn't it?
Well,
guess what? I have to be your candidate.
I know. It doesn't leave you with a lot of negotiating power at the table, does it?
No, 0. It gives you 0 negotiating power at the table.
He'll be a free agent by the time this next new team comes in.
Oh, at what age? He'll be
about 77 or something like that.
Yeah, 77.
Yep.
Very good.
Golden years.
Adrian, outstanding. Please be careful about the players you write about in the future
Yes.
and just, what it might mean for their for their future and their contracts and employment status and all that. That'd be great.
I'll be very mindful of that next time I make a telephone call.
Fantastic. Adrian Proszenko there, the Sydney Morning Herald